Thank you, Carol. Now, they told me I have to hold this up, and then they said that also helps hide my face. Isn't that a great thing? So, anyhow, what I'd like to do is what Chris and I are going to do. Now, we are the superintendent squared, as I refer to us, because Chris is the superintendent of Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, and he's actually going to speak first, and I am the superintendent of Channel Islands National Park. Now, what's really important about this evening is Chris and I have committed to coming to you to tell you about things that we're doing, but also to get some feedback from you and let you ask us questions. So we will actually try and go through our program fairly quickly, and so that you have plenty of time to ask us questions, and it's fair game. You can ask us anything you want, because that's part of what we feel is civic engagement, is the opportunity for you to talk to us and tell us, what's on your mind, or ask us questions. And I'll tell you, every issue is fair game, including talking about the budget. We'll be glad to do that with certain guidelines we have until it's passed. But with that, I just want you to be aware that that's how we're going to move through the program. So with that opening, I'd like to introduce to you the superintendent of Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, Chris Mobley.
Thanks, Russell. So Russell and I both got our jobs here around the same time, which was about 5 years ago. So it's been a parallel road for us, managing both the park and the sanctuary. How many people here have been to the Channel Islands? Okay, it looks like maybe half. How many people are volunteers for the sanctuary or the park right now? And how many are in training to become a volunteer? Anybody? How many people are here for some kind of a class? Anybody here for a class? All right, good. All right, okay, so a real brief 101 just to make sure everybody is on the same page. The Channel Islands, there are 8 of them, and 5 northern Channel Islands, Anacapa, Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, San Miguel, and Santa Barbara, 5 northern Channel Islands, constitute the Channel Islands National Park, and then the waters out 6 miles from the shore of those islands constitute the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. They were both designated in 1980 for you. Our mission is to protect those resources for current and future generations, and so that's what our job is. And both the park and the sanctuary have various programs to do that. We have our management, all the regulations and enforcement and rules and policies, those kinds of things, and also emergency response if there's some kind of an oil spill or something. So it's kind of general management and enforcement and regulations. We have research and monitoring programs. How are we to know if we're doing our job of protecting this resource without some information? So we have to go out there and measure things and count things and take the temperature of things, do chemistry to find out what's the status of the resource, whether it be a bird, a fox, a fish, or the water, and is it healthy? Is it getting better? Or is it getting worse? And then in some cases to have restoration programs. So we have the research and monitoring piece, and then we have a big education and outreach piece. We need citizens like you to be engaged in the park and sanctuary, to care about it, to help us manage it, to provide us input on how to manage it. And also many of you are volunteers. Russell will show some statistics, but basically we get the equivalent of dozens of employees for free because people care enough about the sanctuary and park to volunteer their time. And we also work with many, many partner organizations for different projects. This lecture tonight, we're assisted with by the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum when we do it up in Santa Barbara, and we're also assisted by these Able TV folks to help us get it on cable so a broader audience can learn about what's going on in the park and sanctuary. So those are kind of our broad programs, and we do a ton of stuff. I should mention one unique feature of the sanctuary system is that we have sanctuary advisory councils for every sanctuary. So we have a group composed of agencies, stakeholders such as fishermen, business people, and others, educators, and then just members of the public that meet every 2 months and provide us input into our decision-making process so that we can get input from the community on how to best manage sanctuary. So I encourage you to go to our website, go to other materials to get all the details on what we do, and we'll get into some of that in the question and answer. What I wanted to just touch on to give you a little flavor of what we've been up to is just a couple highlights of some of the things that have been going on in 2007 that are certainly have the most press and are probably the most interesting, and give you a little glimpse into what some of the issues we deal with in the sanctuary. So as it says here, there'll be a few updates, and then we'll try and save time for questions. So I'll be talking about the Marine Protected Area Network that's around the Channel Islands. The sanctuary itself is one large marine protected area. But then within it, there are marine reserves and marine conservation areas. Those are no-take zones that are almost analogous to wilderness areas where you can go, you can look, you can enjoy, but you can't extract anything from those zones. So there's a lot of interest in that topic and how that might help with marine conservation and conserving the sanctuary and park resources. There's also, many of you have seen in the news, anybody live near the beach in Ventura? You might have seen the blue whale carcasses. As if you follow the stories, 3 blue whales were hit by vessels and killed. And so a little information on that, maybe a little more than you might have read in the newspaper or seen on TV. And then at the end, we'll finish it off with a short trailer of a movie we're working on, a documentary that will help connect people to the sanctuary and park, even if they live in Iowa or Nebraska. So on the issue of creating a network of marine reserves and conservation areas inside the sanctuary, why did we want to do that? As I said earlier, our mission is to protect these resources for the long term while allowing compatible use. And so how to achieve that balance of protection while allowing use at the same time? Well, we felt that creating at least a portion of the sanctuary in full protection status would help provide long-term protection and restore abundance, density, population age structure, and enhance the diversity of the natural biological communities, to help protect, restore, and maintain habitats, populations, and ecological processes, and also to provide undisturbed reference sites for research and education. If we can look at a site that's relatively undisturbed and track it over time, we can compare that area to an area that's outside being actively fished or having other impacts on it. And by comparing the two, we can get a better understanding of how those human activities are affecting the resource. And then also to just set some areas aside for their intrinsic value. Anybody in the room a scuba diver? If you're a scuba diver, hopefully over time you will target these areas and dive there because you're hoping to see more and bigger fish and the other things that you want to look at, lobster and so forth. And so just intrinsically there's value to having these areas be undisturbed for your enjoyment. Also, the state of California established a network within state waters of the sanctuary in 2002. State waters go from the shore out to 3 miles. And so under state law, they established, and I'll show in a photo in a moment, the state network that was already there, that we work with the state on planning and developing. And then lastly, to create models for ways to conserve not only sanctuary resources, but ocean resources in general. There's been a lot of work looking at the use of these no-take marine reserves all around the world, and in general, all around the world. They show that they deliver on these goals. They increase the abundance, diversity, size, resiliency, health of the area that's been closed. And so by doing it here, we can do research and demonstrate whether that happens here, and therefore create a model for using this tool as one of the tools in the conservation tool bag for conserving ocean resources. So this image here, I've got a laser pointer. Ha. The green areas are no-take marine reserves, and the yellow areas are conservation areas that allow limited fishing for recreational lobster, recreational finfish of various kinds. And if you go in your fishing game regulations, you can get the list of what you're allowed to fish and not fish. But in the green areas, you can't take anything at all. Even if you can't even take a shell or a rock out of there, according to the regulation. You can look, but don't take anything. So the state, we started a process all the way back in 1999 where we engaged the community through our Sanctuary Advisory Council, went through a planning process that involved the state and the sanctuary to look at the whole area and develop a network of closures that would represent the full array of habitats and species that you find there, from the cold waters at the west end at San Miguel to the warmer waters down here, you have a different variety of species and habitats. So by creating a network across the whole system, you get a representation of the whole system. And we also worked with fishermen and other interested parties to place these in areas to try and minimize the socioeconomic impacts and dislocation. So the goal was to get a good representation and minimize the short-term economic impact. And so the state, under state law, went ahead and designated these areas inside this 3-mile line. This line is a 3-mile line. This line is a 6-mile line. That's the sanctuary boundary. So under state law, they closed the areas that they could inside 3 miles, as you see here. And then once they were done in 2002, we went through the federal legal process to then extend these areas out into the federal waters, as you see here. And in a few cases, we had to actually slightly adjust the sanctuary boundary so we could go out just a little bit past. So we also had to change the sanctuary boundary, for example, right here and right here. And the reason for that is when you make these things into perfect squares and rectangles, it's easier for people to know if they're inside or outside. So it makes it easier for compliance and for enforcement than if you had curves that people had to keep track of. So this is where we are today. If you notice, the color changed from green to red. We worked with people that, just folks like you, saying, how could we make this more understandable? So we hand it out on a piece of paper. People will know what they're looking at. And, you know, red means stop. Green means go. So now that it's red, hopefully it's a little more obvious that red means do not fish. So we went with red in these. The new generation is red, and as you can see, the final network did extend these areas, most of them, into deeper federal waters here and here, and created a new one at the Footprint Marine Reserve right there. So now that we have this implemented, what does that mean? Well, to make this thing work, you not only have to designate it, but then you have to manage it. So what are those management considerations? We have to have enforcement. It's called cooperative because we have to use the Park Service wardens, U.S. Coast Guard, California Department of Fish and Game wardens, and also the NOAA enforcement resources to have effective enforcement out there. It's a cooperative effort among all these agencies. We have a research and monitoring program to see if the results that we expect from these marine reserves come to fruition, and specifically exactly what happens. I mentioned education and outreach. Whether it's a discussion like this, or producing pamphlets, or putting signs at the boat ramps, or getting it onto the web, or a variety of places, putting it in the Fish and Game little regulations handbook, or for example, this is the New Island Views newspaper that the park puts out, and again, showing the partnership we have. They have a spread in here that talks about these Channel Islands marine protected areas, uses this image, and then island by island gives you a blow-up that shows where the closures are, what the rules are, and also gives a history of the process. So here's a summary of basically what I've been telling you the last few minutes. So these various education and outreach products to get the word out and make sure that people know what the rules are. I mentioned community involvement through our Sanctuary Advisory Council. This shows the Sanctuary Advisory Council. They hear about what's going on and they provide their input. So, for example, a stakeholder group helped us realize that red is better than green. And then there's all the administrative aspects of just running this thing and funding it and making sure that the boat can run and all those kinds of things. So again, from the creation of it, to the management of it, to the enforcement of it, to all aspects of the program, and this is how almost everything we do is this way. It's cooperation among multiple agencies. In this case, we show the Park Service boat doing research, this California Fish and Game boat with wardens on it helping with enforcement, and the NOAA plane doing overflights both for research purposes and for surveillance purposes. If we see something going on that shouldn't be happening, we can radio and then get these guys or the park wardens to be on scene. And we also work with Coast Guard. So just to highlight a little bit, what are some of the ecological research and monitoring that we're doing? What are we trying to find out? Well, changes in, as I mentioned, abundance size, biomass. Spawning biomass just means the number of spawners out there, the number of reproducers. The research in the literature shows when you close an area, especially for the territorial fish that tend to stay in an area, like your rockfish, for example. You get big fat females and they lay thousands and thousands of eggs, many more eggs per female than a smaller female. And so you get a lot more productivity, a lot more spawning. Changes in species composition. Russell will show a slide in his presentation that shows how, for example, in the kelp forest, this is kelp forest, if you make it a fully protected area, you get more lobster because they're no longer being harvested. The lobster eat the urchin, so then you get less urchin. And then since there's less urchin, urchin eat kelp, so then you get more kelp. So that's an example of how some species go up. Lobster went up, kelp went up, urchins go down. So changes can go in both directions. And then habitat changes that can happen. For example, if you can no longer trawl in an area, then over time you should see less scars and damage from trawls running along the bottom because no more trawling allowed. And then this issue of spillover, the big hope is that when these areas are closed, fishing is still allowed in the other 80% of the waters, and the hope is that over time there will be more opportunities to catch big fish because the fish will be in the reserve, they'll grow bigger, and then sooner or later a fish will stray across the boundary and then an angler will be there to catch it. In Florida, for example, the trophy fish that are caught in the state of Florida, many of them are caught right on the edge of what's essentially a marine reserve, which is the area around Cape Canaveral where the rockets get launched was closed for security reasons. So there's a whole area around there of sloughs and waterways that were not accessible to fishing. And sure enough, all the trophy fish that are caught out of there are caught just on the boundary of the closure area. So that's an example of how a marine protected area, fully protected marine reserve, can result in a benefit to anglers over time. Socioeconomic monitoring, we need to see what the impacts are, if any, on all activities, both the fishing activities that take fish, for example, and also other activities like diving, sailing, wildlife viewing, kayaking. And so we have an economist that's, through a combination of questionnaires and analyzing other available data, seeing how these closures affect these different sectors. So we mentioned, for example, and I've seen it, I've gone out on a dive boat where the dive boat is saying, hey, we're going to go dive in a marine reserve because we think we're going to see more stuff there. So there can be potential positive benefits to certain sectors. And then also seeing over time what the initial impact is of the closure, and then hopefully over a longer period of time, ultimately seeing benefits from the closures, even to fishing activities. But we have to do the research and get the data to see if that plays out as we expect it to. So here's an example of the kind of data we can gather. This is from our aerial flights from '97 to 2004. Each dot is a vessel that was sighted from our plane, and we get its exact GPS location and what kind of boat it is. Is it a lobster boat? Is it a sailboat? Is it an urchin boat? And what are they doing? Are they just transiting? Are they actively fishing? Are they water skiing? Are they surfing? Whatever. And we put it into a database. And so, for example, this composite of vessels over a number of years, it just gives you a quick idea that most of the boats stay pretty darn close to the shore. And that once you get out past 3 miles, you don't see that many boats by comparison. And in fact, if you drill down into the database and what were those boats doing, 9 times out of 10, they're either on their way to the island or they're on their way back from the island. They're in transit. They're not stopped and doing something there for the most part. They're just on their way to or from for the most part. So that's the kind of information we can use to see. And so now we've seen also from our data we've been collecting since they were closed in 2002 that in general the boats have high compliance and they're staying out of the reserves. They're not fishing in the reserves. There are some violations, but compliance is actually quite high. And the enforcement community is pleased with that. They weren't sure if that would be the case, and it turns out the compliance is high. So we're 5 years since the establishment in 2002. So we're having a symposium. Channel Island Symposium is happening in February, and the last 2 days of it, there's going to be a special session on the outcome of the last 5 years of monitoring on all these things I've been talking about, on how it's been going with the ecological and socioeconomic monitoring, what's been happening with education and outreach, and also what's been happening with enforcement. So if you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to come to this session. All right, I'll try and speed up a little. Now, the blue whales, shifting topics. Blue whales, largest animal, as far as we know, to have ever lived on the earth. If you could, the aorta, the largest artery in the body, a man could walk upright in its aorta, is how big it is. I probably got it backwards, but its tongue is the size of a Volkswagen bus, and its heart is the size of an African elephant, or the other way around. The other way around? Oh, I got some folks that know. Okay, its heart is the size of a Volkswagen bus, and its tongue is the size of an African elephant. A lot of people think elephants are really big animals. Well, elephant just adds up to the size of this animal's tongue. And it happens to have some of the largest concentrations in the entire world right here at the Channel Islands. So here's a picture of a carcass, one of the 3 that died. Island Packers is going by. Interesting to note that they saw a great white shark feeding on it as well as other sharks. So we still have large sharks in the sanctuary, which is good news. This shows from aerial surveys where the carcasses were seen, these 3 carcasses at various times. And you can see it's right near the major shipping lane. Well, the National Marine Fisheries Service, which manages marine mammals for the U.S., they had some necropsies done, or an autopsy, you can also call it, where they looked very carefully at these at least 2 of the 3 carcasses to try and understand what happened. And they found massive broken bones and bruising consistent with being struck. But then the question was, well, was the whale already dead before it got hit? Was it sick and disoriented, and maybe that was why it got hit? So they had to do a lot more sampling and research and analysis. And my understanding is their conclusion is that up until the time they were struck, they were healthy and they were fine. And what killed them was being struck. And so this, it's hard to see, but these little circles, various circles, clear ones, and then there's a couple blue circles here. These circles are a composite of all the different aerial surveys we did. We did 10 aerial surveys flying on either Coast Guard or Fish and Game aircraft, because our aircraft happened to be broken down during this period. And basically 10 surveys from the first carcasses showing up at the end of September through basically the whole month of October, and seeing where the whales were. And during that whole month of October, they pretty much were concentrated, all the sightings were right in the shipping lane. Normally, this is kind of where they typically are in the summer, in this region around here. And this year they were here, and we believe it's because that's where the food was. That's where the krill was this year. That's where their food supply was, and so that's where they were going to eat. So imagine if there were a whole bunch of grass growing on Highway 101, and all the deer were feeding on it. That's kind of what happened. And so, you know, the vessels, the big container ships that come down here are going 25 knots, which is 30 miles an hour. They're so big that even the largest animal in the world, when one of those ships hit them, that would be like you and your Ford F-350 running over a squirrel. I mean, they're not even going to feel it. That's how big those ships are. And so based on these surveys, starting in early October, with the cooperation of the Coast Guard and the National Marine Fisheries Service, we started putting out warnings and information to the shipping industry through the normal Notice to Mariners broadcasting system to let them know that there's blue whales in the area, to travel at a prudent speed, recommended 10 knots, to keep an extra good lookout and watch out. And we hope that you know, either it was luck or maybe partly because of that warning, but no whales were struck in October, and now our surveys show they've pretty much moved out of the area. So for now, the risk has passed. This was an unusual mortality event. We went through all the records going way back as far as records are, and it's typical for 1 or 2 whales to die on the West Coast a year, but to have 3 happen in the space of a few weeks never happened before. So we're going to be getting together with all of the agencies that are involved, Coast Guard, the International Maritime Organization, National Marine Fisheries, other agencies, and sort of review all this to talk about what do we do next year to try and prevent this problem, and in the longer term to do the studies and the analysis to say, what are our options to further reduce the risk of this in the future. So that's kind of an update on that, and I'm sure you'll probably have questions, and we'll get into that. But before I turn it over to Russell, I did mention that we have a movie we're working on, where we're working with John Brooks, who's a renowned underwater filmmaker. He's worked with James Cameron, people like that. And this is a little clip. He's got a trailer of the film we're working on. Do you have the mic? Okay. Yeah.
Hello, hello. There it is. I was on mute. That's even better. First it was hide my face, now it's mute me. So good evening again. Chris did a great job, I think. That sounds loud, doesn't it? It does sound okay? It's just echoing into my ear. I thought Chris did a really nice job outlining the sanctuary and some of those, it sounds like it died again, crossover programs that we'll see, and I'm going to emphasize some of those too. Now I'm going to walk around a little bit, so if I get in the way, just say, move out of the way. I don't stand behind podiums very well. But let's start off with, I always like to start, and I do every single one of my talks, is trying to ground you on, when I came to this park, I set 2 objectives that we were going to move forward on in this park. And these are those 2 objectives. Is all my decision making and a lot of our planning is based on these 2 things. Is what are we going to do to preserve the natural and cultural resources in this park, and where they're broken, what are we going to do to restore those back to natural conditions? Now that should pose some questions right away, because I always get asked, well, how do you make that decision? So when you do resources management or restoration, what point in time do you pick? Well, I'll get to that in just a second. And then the second is this connecting the park to the people. And I emphasize these every single time. Now, and a lot of times when you listen to a park or you hear a park give this talk, they talk about connecting the park, the people to the park. because it's really about getting the visitors into the park. Well, ours is a very different story here. And part of that is because when Congress established Channel Islands National Park, it recognized the fragility of the resources. And it also said that we were to have carrying capacities on the islands. And it also said, for me as the manager, that you're to manage this resource, so you are to have negligible impacts on park resources. Actually, I think it says no, negligible. So how much is negligible? Is it that much? Is it that much? Is it that much? Is it this much? How much is that? And so that's how I sort of make my decisions every day of how do we move forward with lots of our programs. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the planning. So I'm going to tell you about some of our accomplishments. At the same time, I'm also going to tell you some of those things we're doing going into 2008. So let's do this first goal. Now, how do we pick a point in time? Because that's the question I've been asked over and over for the last 3 years on these ecological restoration programs. They would keep saying, how do you pick a point in time? Well, again, another thing that drives my decisions before I answer that question is this, the mission of the National Park Service. Now, take a look at that. There's some really key pieces to this, and it's something we're going to talk about all the time when I talk, is that you have to understand why we exist, the National Park Service. And we exist from 1916 for this purpose, to conserve the scenery. Now, that's a whole story on itself on how that word got there. And the natural and historic objects therein, and look at how they spelled wildlife. That's not misspelled. That means everything in the natural world. Therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such a manner as to leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. So remember when I said about no negligible impacts, adverse impacts, and Congress even said, Park Service, you exist to conserve, but to make sure that those resources are unimpaired for future generations. That's why we exist. It's not just for the parks themselves, it's for this purpose. And that's how we make our decisions. So how do you pick that point in time? Does anybody want to guess? How did we decide that pigs don't belong on Santa Cruz Island? Do you think I just picked a date out of the sky and said, well, I'm going to go back to 1849? Sounds like a good date, right? That's not how we do it. The purpose on how we make these decisions is I am trying to allow natural processes to prevail. Where humans have come in and interacted with those natural processes, I try and remove that impact. So those islands evolved out there without pigs. Humans put pigs out there. So I'm not trying to return it to 1849. I'm trying to return it to when humans weren't impacting them on the scale that they impact them today. That's how I make the decision. It's not about a point in time. Now, if I'm managing a historic resource, like an old house, then it's probably a point in time, because that's the purpose of a historic resource, is to manage it and that with that historic character. So that's, I get that question all the time. Now let's talk about some really neat things. How could you not talk about these, Pat? Yes. How could you not? Pat Meyer, who's the president of what?
Friends.
There you go. See, I'm going to make sure they knew who you were. Friends of the Island Fox. It's people like her and people like you and the people like the Nature Conservancy and the Fish and Wildlife Service and the park and Fish and Game who decided, this species only occurs in the Channel Islands. This fox that evolved out there without aerial predators, that evolved out there that actually evolved with size that would be smaller so it could survive on these islands. They were in jeopardy. And starting in early 1990s. And when I came here as a wildlife ecologist, I didn't think the first thing that was going to be thrown in my face was that one of your species is going to get listed on the endangered species list. And that would be the island fox. Within a year of me being here, it's on the endangered species list. And I wanted to put up some figures because I can't tell you how happy I am, is that we as a park decided, with the help of the public, is that this critter is worth keeping on Earth. And we should direct resources to protecting this critter. And we want to make sure that future generations can enjoy this fox in the future. When I came here, we had a captive breeding program. And you look at this lower column here, and you'll see that on Santa Rosa, this is how many foxes existed on the island in the year 2000. 15 foxes. That's it. Santa Rosa is a big island. We'll come back to Santa Cruz. San Miguel, 15 foxes in 1999. They are not going to make it. And of course, the problem was aerial predators, the golden eagle, which is not a native inhabitant of the Channel Islands. So we started a captive breeding program and actually started with 18 on Santa Cruz. There was about 120 that were still in the wild. So when I talk about San Miguel and Santa Rosa, I'm talking about no foxes in the wild. All the wild foxes were brought into captivity. Every single one on San Miguel and Santa Rosa. So we had to start a captive breeding program. And I am here to tell you that in 2007, there is no more captive breeding program on Santa Cruz. There are over 300 foxes in the wild. If you go to Scorpion, you see them routinely. If you go to San Miguel, there are no more foxes in captivity. They're all in the wild, and there's now 120 of them. This just goes to show us that there is hope. You hear all this stuff on TV about how bad things are, but we as a society can make a decision to save things. And all you have to do is have the will and believe and hope. And we did that here. And look, you've got a species who's on the recovery from being endangered. I think that's a great story. Santa Rosa, we still have 24 in captivity, 60 in the wild. And the reason for that is not all the stressors are gone on Santa Rosa. And so we have to be careful. We have to make sure we're still breeding some and that we can continue to put more and more out into the wild. This is a great story. And this is one we're going to continue to talk about. And I'll tell you, if our friends at Nature Conservancy didn't stand up with us on Santa Cruz Island, we wouldn't have this great story. They played a major role in the ecological restoration, and the same with the Friends of the Island Fox. And it's their role, Friends of the Island Fox, was going out talking about the fox. People will only care about things that they love or they know about. Thank you, Pat. That helps tremendously. So now, this guy. Remember last year I said, first time in 50 years the bald eagles returned to the Channel Islands, the northern Channel Islands. They were gone for 50 years. Why? Humans. DDT. Well, the park had this idea, let's put them back. Maybe it's time. Let's put them back. The park wants to try and maintain all of its ecological pieces, make sure there's no extra pieces, that's usually exotics, and don't lose any pieces, and then put pieces back. This is a piece we had to put back. Now this is a little grainy picture. You would think the park would have a nice beautiful picture of this, don't you? That's because this is taken from the Eagle Cam. You know, we broadcast this live throughout the whole, the hack season, but the whole nesting season and the rearing season of this chick. You can go on live and watch this whole thing unfold. And people love it. I'll give you some statistics on this later. Now, unfortunately, this little chick fledged. And if you follow global warming, you know one of the big problems are cars. And guess what it was for this bird? A car. It flew, I believe it was Idaho. Is that correct? Any of my staff know? Nevada. No, it's close by. You see, Chris and I make mistakes. That's why we have staff out in the crowd here. Is that this bird landed and it was hit by a car. And so that's unfortunate. But you know what? That's no reason to give up hope. This is the second nest or eaglet that this nest has produced, or this couple has produced. And there's no reason to believe they won't do it again next year. And in fact, most of the birds that we started to reintroduce several years ago or reestablished, they're all becoming sexually mature. We could see 3, 4, 5 nests possibly, and we could even see one on Santa Rosa possibly next year. Another great story. And when you think about this, you guys, we live in a sea of 18 million people. We see cars and concrete, all these things every single day. But just 12 miles, 24 miles, 50 miles off this coast is this land that we've all set aside to say, it's this great place. And it's a place that we can look at and say, wow, this is what it can be, and this is what it is because we care about it. And I just have to keep thanking you for it, because we need all your support to continue to do this. You see what, everybody see what this is? This is pig rooting on Santa Cruz. And this is actually in an archaeological site. Go to Santa Cruz now. Go there today. You don't see this anymore. There are no more pigs on Santa Cruz. The project is done. It is over. There's no longer a food source for golden eagles on Santa Cruz Island. There are oak trees now that are this tall that are producing acorns, which you never would have seen before. There are archaeological sites that aren't being dug up anymore. There are less invasions of alien plant species because the islands don't need this rototiller to evolve over time or to propagate new young. This isn't a garden out there. They don't need the rototiller. So what this did was help move or spread exotics. And now we should see that start to slow down. And maybe we can get a handle on some of those more invasive exotics. That project is done. It's over. And thanks again to the Nature Conservancy. They had to stand with us side by side to move this project forward. And it was a great project. And as Chris mentioned about the marine reserves, great partnership here, Sanctuary, the state of California, and the National Park Service. And as Chris explained to you, there are jurisdictions. The state has a jurisdiction out 3 miles. The sanctuary has authorities up to the high tide line out to 6 miles. The Park Service high tide line out to 1 mile. But I'm here to tell you the Park Service does not have legal authority over the critters in the water. But that doesn't prevent us from doing our job or fulfilling our responsibilities of telling you what's happening inside the park waters. We are obligated to do that. And for now, over 25 years, we've been monitoring the kelp forest in the Channel Islands. And it's that data that helps us make decisions. So it's working with the sanctuary, it's working with the state of California, so we can provide decision makers with the best information to make an informed decision. And that's part of what parks also provide you, is a baseline for which you can make decisions on how best to manage resources. So I'm not going to read that to you, but that's basically what Chris outlined for you when he was talking of some of the things we're seeing at the Anacapa Reserve. You know, but a big part of this, what Fish and Game asked me this year was, well, that's great, you have all this monitoring information, but do people get it? Are they obeying the new rules that are out there? Well, as you can see, Ranger here, I got the Rangers are here in the back of the room too, a lot of them that do the Marine Patrol, and that's what they do. They go out and contact the fishermen and see, do you know where you are? Do you know what the rules are? Because a lot of enforcement is really education. It's not about writing a ticket. It's about making sure people know where they are. And here's what the Rangers tell me. The awareness of the reserves by fishermen at the islands is high. That is a great thing to know. That means the word is getting out that the reserves exist. Most know of the reserves, but many are not aware of the exact locations. Now that's a problem. Now I personally would think that if you're going to go in a boat and go 12 miles across a shipping channel, you ought to have some idea where you're going, right? And you ought to know where you're going to be. Now perhaps I'm wrong on that, but I'm just telling you that that's how I feel. And I think you need to know where you are when you're out there. Reserve violations fall in 3 groups. So you got the first one, 1/3 have no knowledge about the reserves. Well, we've got to work on that. You know, we got to work on that. That tells us that some people aren't getting the word out. Now, I can tell you that's not necessarily Ventura people or Santa Barbara people, but that's probably a lot of LA people who aren't getting the word. So we got to figure that out. 1/3 know about the reserves, but they didn't realize they were in it. Okay, well, that goes back to my previous comment. And then 1/3 knowingly break the law. There's not much I can do about that. But we're going to focus on these two up here, 2/3 of the people, because if we can continue to get good compliance from 2/3, we're winning the game. Because that 1/3, if they don't care, they just don't care. And they're the ones that get the tickets. So, what about cultural resources? Anybody know where this is? Scorpion? Don. Is it Scorpion? Smugglers. Smugglers. This is the next big project for us. It looks like it's in pretty good shape, doesn't it? You been in it? It's not in very good shape. And one of the worst things is it's not earthquake proof. So what we did at Scorpion last year, and I reported on it, is we earthquake proofed the building, and we're turning that into a visitor center downstairs. And the plans are underway right now, and hopefully the implementation this year. So that'll be a visitor contact station in Scorpion, hopefully by next summer. Now this hopefully could serve as a similar purpose. In the following years, we're going to go in and do the earthquake proofing, and then we've already set a leach field out there. We've removed the bathroom away from it, and so hopefully this will help serve the park and visitors in the future too, because you got this beautiful building that's out there, and now you can just walk around it. Hopefully we can get it open and secure as a nice cultural resource for you to experience. Now, this is really neat. I know this probably doesn't say a whole lot to a lot of you, but where's this? Dave Bagan, you cannot say. Where's this?
Arlington Springs.
Arlington Springs. So what? Arlington Springs. Great place. Oh, man, it's an incredible place to go to. I went out there this last year with the Santa Barbara Natural History Museum. Now, why would I go out with them? Because they are working with another private party, and we're going to permit the reopening of this site is where they found Arlington Man, the 13,000-year-old man. You didn't hear that lecture series last year, did you? They went back and forth, and it's a man again. It's a man again. So, sorry, but that's what they're telling me, it's a man again. So anyhow, we're going to reopen this site and see if there's more remains. But remember, dated 13,000 years before present. The oldest human remains in North America. That's pretty amazing. And why do you have this on the islands? Well, one, that tells us there was civilizations of some sorts out there, but the other is we don't have these ground-burrowing mammals like ground squirrels, and we don't have pigs, so what they don't do is they don't churn up these archaeological sites. Archaeologists love to come out here and study the archaeology because it's intact, and it's just got this great record. And so we're working with them, and we're going to open this up. Here's a neat story I just heard today. Kate Faulkner, my chief of resources, natural resources, comes in, she goes, "You've got to see this tape I took on Santa Rosa." Now, who's been on Santa Rosa in a really foggy day? Okay. Have you been there on a foggy day? Were you ever in the Oaks? And did you experience something very different underneath those oaks? I couldn't believe it. Kate Faulkner showed me this film today. She's under the oaks with her little camera, and it sounds like it's raining. The oaks are intercepting all of this moisture, and it sounds like it's raining. She steps 1 foot outside the canopy. It's silent. Now, she didn't know that. I didn't know. Now, we've had staff that have been telling us that. But to go out and experience that, and she just showed it to me on a clip. I thought, that's amazing. And who would have thought that? We know that they get a lot of their moisture from the fog, but who would have thought the role the oak tree is playing in concentrating that moisture in one place? Next time you're out there, go try and have that experience, because I can't wait now to go do it. I was really moved by that. You know, it was sort of spiritual. But the other is, and Chris showed you this too, is part of our responsibilities. Our parks are the public trust for our native peoples. And we try and work with, we don't try, we do work here, but the sanctuary supports the Tamala Crossing by giving them logistical support and protection. You know, can you imagine you got 4 to 5 guys paddling this Tamala across the shipping lanes? You need a little help, you know, and making sure you don't get run over. It takes them, what, about 10 hours, Chris? Something like that? And then there's a great celebration at Scorpion where last year was about 125 of the Chumash people who came together, and it helps them tie back to their culture. And then us, we get to experience that culture by watching this ceremony that occurs. So the park plays a role for everybody. And it's just a great place to rejuvenate and relax, get away from it all. How about connecting the park to the people? Let me throw up a couple things here for you to look at. Island Packers, again, this year took over 60,000 people to the islands. So it's increasing the popularity. Over 25,000 students were reached through various things. And that's Carol Peterson. She's in the back. She introduced us in the beginning, is that we're in these classrooms. You know, in fact, she walked in my office last year and she held up a 2nd grade textbook. And it was called Oh Rangers, the chapter, something like that?
Exploring Parks with Ranger Docket.
Exploring Parks with Ranger Docket. And right on the front page is the National Park Service badge. So what does Carol do? She designs a program for 2nd graders to go in and talk about park rangers. So we're trying to connect those kids to their national parks early in life. And then she uses the book of, I know my child had to read it. My next one's going to have to read it. Island of the Blue Dolphin, which is taught in 4th grade. And so, you know, there's another opportunity for us to connect this very special place to kids. And so Carol does that in the classroom. But look at this. Last year it was 700 volunteers. Now it's 900 volunteers. There are people, 900 people, within Santa Barbara and Ventura counties that feel it's worth their time to give up their free time to come be with us at the park and at the sanctuary. To me, that's a great outpouring of citizenship, is that you found the time to spend it with us. Thank you for doing that. And that equates, look at that, 65,000 hours of somebody else's time. And if you want to put that to dollars, figure out what the average federal employee makes, that's how many positions are given to this park. 31 positions in volunteer hours. But that's not the only way we get help. You got these two groups here. Channel Islands Park Foundation, which is now a newly formed organization waiting for their 501c3, which is specifically a philanthropy organization for fundraising and volunteerism for this national park. And they're organizing right now. And of course, Pat's here, and that's Friends of the Island Fox, a very strong education component, but also with some philanthropy opportunities also. So it's people like this who say, well, we're going to help you in a different way. We may not come here and volunteer for you, but we're going to do it different. And they reach out to the masses of folks. And of course, the Eagle Cam, I told you I'd tell you about that, 350,000 viewers this year. Pretty amazing. And that's all across the world, not just the United States. And then another very proud moment is the signing of the cooperative agreement with Ventura County Office of Education. And why is that such a big deal? Well, you see here, this year, CAPS TV. Another way the park is trying to connect to the people is working with CAPS TV. We can broadcast these lecture series, and some other people get a chance to hear about the park and the sanctuary. But in this particular one, you all know we've been doing Channel Islands Live for 20 years. You know, that's the underwater interactive program at Anacapa. We used to broadcast it here live in the visitor center. We kind of lost the technology. And so we've been silent on the mainland for years. Well, the Ventura County Office of Education said, we can help you. So what is it in it for them to help us? Science-based curriculum we can put in the classroom. So now where the kids, instead of learning about the kelp forest from a textbook, now they will talk to the ranger underwater from their classroom. And I think that that's just amazing. So now the kids can appreciate the park, they can appreciate the sanctuary, but what they can really appreciate are the ocean resources. And so we can take a variety of programs. We can talk about the fox. We can talk about cultural resources. But the idea is we can work with the state of California in developing curriculum or building on the curriculum that already exists, and we can go right into the classroom with two-way communication. And we are really excited about this. My goal, and I said this last year, and I'm going to say it this year, and I said it to the superintendent of the school district, my goal is to have this program broadcast in Nebraska so that somebody sitting in a small school in a cornfield will say, I never knew that existed, and I talked to a diver underwater in California. That's my goal. Here's what's in the future for us in planning. Remember last year I talked about general management plan. I'm not going to talk about this year because I'm tired of telling you a different schedule. So this is what's holding it up. Is that you can only tell the story so long, and then after a while it catches up with you. The general management plan is being held up in Washington because every time we do a major planning effort, we're to consider the designation of wilderness. And that is not moving in Washington right now. People don't want to talk about wilderness, so there it lies dead until they make a decision. Now, it is in the Secretary's office, so it could move any day now. Concession services contract, this is one you should all know, is there was a new law passed in 1999 about concessions. And it used to be whoever our concessionaire was, they had grandfather rights and they can continue to get the new concession. They changed those laws in 1999, and so now every concession contract has to be competed. So every 10 years, we have to compete a new concessions contract. So over this next year, we will be competing for new transportation contracts. So that some of you might think if you're in that business, great. Others who have had a great tie with the current concessionaires, that's a scary, scary thought. But I just want you all to know we're going to be going through that process. Everybody knows what's going on in San Francisco Bay right now. Sad. very sad. And you haven't experienced it here since 1969, is that right? Let's hope we never experience an oil spill again. But with the sanctuary in the park, we're doing oil spill preparedness right now, and with a big meeting coming up in January where we're identifying all of our sensitive resources and giving all of the people who will be the first responders, giving them the clear direction of what they should and shouldn't do inside the sanctuary and inside the park boundary. Because what we don't want to do is have more harm come to park resources because of our lack of planning. And then NPS, National Park Service Centennial. I'm going to close with that. There's a bill in Congress right now. Now, by the way, we're on what we call a continuing resolution. That means Congress hasn't signed any bills authorizing us to really spend money, except for the amount of money we had last year. So there's a bill in there that's called the Centennial Challenge. And what this bill is to do two things. One is Secretary Kempthorne wants to see more seasonal park rangers on the ground. And he wants the Park Service to hire 3,000 additional seasonals this summer so that there's more people, more park rangers, maintenance, interpretation, law enforcement on the ground for you to interact with. And he wants us to maintain that 3,000 every year from now to the year 2016, because 2016 is the anniversary, 100th anniversary of the National Park Service. But the other big piece of his proposal is that for the first time, the federal government is proposing a dollar-for-dollar match, meaning that if any private entity, like Friends of the Island Fox, come in and say, we have $20,000 to do fox recovery, let's put together a proposal. If that gets accepted in Washington, the federal government matches that $20,000 dollar for dollar, and now we have $40,000. The idea is to put $100 million into the National Park Service between now and 2016. So that is what's before Congress to see if they'll approve that strategy. So with that, I will close, and Chris and I will be glad to answer all your questions. Thanks very much. All right. I take the easy ones. Chris takes the hard ones. Yes, ma'am.
Simple one. How do you view the Eagle Camp?
How do you view the Eagle Cam? This time of year, you can't.
Okay.
So how do you get to the Eagle Cam, Carol?
How do you get to the
To it when it's up and running. First of all, we usually do a press release to tell you that it's up and running.
Okay. You can go right to the Park Service website, and on the front page it'll say Eagle Camp. Okay. That'll link to it, or you can Google Channel Islands Live, and it should be the top hit. It's a Ventura County Office event server. It's not anything else.
So you can get there through our website. Yours too? Can you get it through yours?
Well, we have a link. We have a link to the park website at the sanctuary as well.
Right. So what it does is it leads you to a link to the Ventura County Office of Education. They actually sponsor the whole webpage.
ChannelIslandsLive.com.
There you go.
ChannelIslandsLive.com.
That's what you Google, ChannelIslandsLive.com.
No, you actually then could type that right in, Channel Islands Live. Right, but again, you go there now, it'll be dark.
Especially now.
Especially now.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
As long as I've been into boating, I've heard, why don't they take the shipping lanes and put them outside the islands?
That's for you.
Okay, well, there's a lot of reasons to consider that as an option. Something like 25% of the particulates in our air quality region come from the ships, and moving them offshore might reduce that somewhat. We've shown with the blue whale data that perhaps the blue whales are more likely to be in the shipping lane where it is now than maybe if it was on the other side. On the other hand, the shipping lanes are established under international maritime law, and it's quite a big deal, a lot of international negotiation to get them changed. And on the backside of the islands, the military reserves that area for doing military exercises. Now they do allow the big oil tankers to go through, but there's only a couple of oil tankers a week, so they can work around that issue and still have their exercises. But these container ships and cargo ships and car carriers, they're going through constantly. During the week it's one every 10 or 15 minutes. So if they were to have the shipping lanes on the other side, then the military would likely have to really make a big change in their area of operation. So I wouldn't say it's off the table, but first we have to show that it would actually work. We need to have the data to see whether, maybe sometimes the blue whales are on the other side. And wouldn't it be terrible if you changed the lane and the next year 3 whales got hit on the other side? Then people would be saying, well, that was dumb. So we need to do the research, and then we need to engage all the agencies that are involved and engage the public and consider the options and look at it. And I will say, though, that a change of this magnitude is a big deal. On the East Coast, they adjusted the shipping lane going into Boston to try and reduce the frequency of strikes on the North Atlantic right whale. And even though they're down to just 40 right whales, 40 left on the planet in the Atlantic, still, it took years of study and negotiation to get that change. So I'm not saying that it can't happen, but it's going to take a lot of data and a lot of discussion and a lot of analysis of whether it would actually make a big difference before that's going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. So we're one of the agencies trying to get the science to the table and to get the discussions started. And certainly to have at least all the different measures we can come up with to minimize the harm and the risk between now and whenever some bigger adjustments might be made.
Just a comment on that.